This is Josh Gross. I'm here today with Dr. Bill Burke, 50 years in Los Angeles politics. Bill, welcome.
Well, thank you, Josh. Good to be with you.
So, Bill, how'd you first get to Los Angeles?
It's a long story, but I ended up, after leaving the military service, working for the former Speaker of the California Assembly, Jess Unruh. And he was going to run for governor, and he had hired me to manage the media portion of his campaign. And when he didn't run, I came to work for Councilman Billy Mills in LA.
Tell me about Jess, of course, the great Bill Boyarsky biography of him, Big Daddy. But was Jess as colorful as he's crafted out to be today?
He was bigger than life. I have not met another California politician who had the same kind of ambiance as he did. And that may be a good thing, and that may be a bad thing. But he had a presence all his own, and he was larger than life.
He ran for governor against Governor Reagan, of course, when Governor Reagan was going for his second term. Do you think that was the wrong political choice for him? Should he stayed where he was in state government?
Well, you know, Jess had that overriding ambition to be governor, and he held it as long as he could, and finally he could see the end of the road coming, so he had no alternative.
Now, by that you mean because the district was changing demographically?
Of course.
Because he represented the USC area for the most part, right? Yeah.
Right, and so, you know, he could have stayed in the assembly because there was no term limits, obviously, but the overall politics of the state of California at that time was as good as it was going to get for him.
Why were you drawn to local politics?
I think that it's in my family's tradition to want to serve. Now, I was drawn as a young person because I thought it was exciting and one person could really change the world. And I've seen that on many occasions. You know, people say one person can't change the world, but I've seen it the whole other side of the story. But when I found out that I wasn't personality suited for elected office, I decided to go off into the business world.
Okay, so let's talk about Billy Mills for a second. So this was District 8, and there was 3 black councilmen at the time: Billy Mills, Gil Lindsay, Tom Bradley. So compare and contrast for us, roughly at that time, what the 3
Well, actually, when I was there, Tom wasn't there.
So Tom had already been mayor at that point, you mean?
No, Tom, this was before Tom was ever elected.
Okay.
And I'm really old. In fact, there was Billy and Gil.
Okay.
And
compare and contrast them in terms of their political issues. And
they were both 2 of the finest men I ever knew in my life. Totally different people. Totally different people. Billy Mills was very cerebral, lawyer, you know, looked at everything very analytically. Gil, on the other hand, was trained in the trenches. You know, he was a former chauffeur for Kenny Hahn, but he had a tremendous empathy for the community that he lived in, and he was based by his wife, Teresa, who never was far away from any political decision or personal decision that he made. But they both loved LA, and I am honored to have called them both my friends.
And tell me about South LA at that time. You mentioned it was demographically changing somewhat, politically changing. Paint a picture for me a little bit, what it was like.
You know, there was a dichotomy in South Central Los Angeles. There was those people who were politically inclined, who were the Tom Bradley people. And then there were those who were the Merv Dymally people. I was a Merv Dymally person. I ended up marrying a Tom Bradley person. And,
well, we're going to get to that.
So you know, I eventually was co-opted.
Right,
yeah, I was eventually co-opted.
Yeah.
But for probably 15, 20 years, they fought like tooth and nail.
Because they were just representing different parts of the black community, or what specifically?
Different ideologies. Different ideologies. It was a sheer fight for political power.
So it's naive to think there's one black community. Now, obviously, it has different wings.
I don't think there's one in any community.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, on the street, there's no community.
Right.
You know, but in those days,
Well, because, nowadays demographics, people say, the Latino vote, the black vote, it's obviously much more complicated than that.
I never agree with that because I know that in the Latino community and in the black community, there's so many different divergent ideological goals and aspirations that maybe 10, 15 years ago we were more monolithic, but today there's too many individual thinkers out there.
Autumn recently posted on her Facebook a great picture of you and Merv Dymally and Robert F. Kennedy. So let me ask you about that. When did you meet Senator Kennedy?
That picture was taken 4 days before he was killed. That picture was taken in the hotel across the street from the Biltmore, not the Biltmore, the Ambassador, where he was assassinated.
Sure.
And he was trying at that time to get Jess to help him to coalesce the black community for his candidacy for presidency.
And were you at the Ambassador the night he was shot?
No, I wasn't.
Did you watch it on TV?
No, I was. It's really interesting. The biggest lobbyist in the state in those days used to be a Don O. Brown. And he was a very close personal friend of mine from the days when he was just a guy on the street and wasn't a big time lobbyist. And he said to me, he said, well, why don't we go to dinner and then we'll go by the Ambassador and hear Kennedy's speech. We were at a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown when Robert Kennedy got shot.
And did people at the restaurant know what had happened?
Oh, yeah.
Word got out. Well, there was no cell phones in those days.
Oh, yeah. There were no cell phones, trust me.
But word
there was
spread.
TV.
Yeah,
it was TV. And it went absolutely berserk in that restaurant at that moment.
So when you worked for Councilman Mills, what skills specifically did you take from that job?
Well, there were a couple of other field deputies who worked along with me, and they were both very adroit teachers. One was Speedy Curtis, who most people won't remember, but Speedy was a person's person. He loved people and he loved being out in the community, and he was a great community organizer. And then there was a deputy who later became a city councilman by the name of Bob Farrell.
Who succeeded Billy when he became a judge.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bob is still around today and still doing good work in the community. So I tried to learn from both of them. And
was this politics 101? I mean, were you cutting your teeth? Yeah.
For me, because I was from Cleveland.
Right.
I left Cleveland, went to the military, and left the military and came here. So I didn't know much about anything. And they were both really fascinating people to learn from, because if I followed them around, I saw how they each totally independently dealt with constituencies. And
was it a very constituent-heavy office? I mean, was that a lot of what you did?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
So whatever they called about a pothole, a tree, whatever it was, you took care of it.
As a matter of fact, remember Nick Shamus, who he used to love to have the curbs painted red in front of his dealership so people couldn't park there. So he nicknamed me Redline Bill because I could
You'd
get
send
your
the crew
curb.
out there and
I'd get a curbs painted red. But yeah, we were very constituent oriented. But when it came campaign time, I saw how those constituent services translated into community organization for re-election.
Sure. And then that you pay your dues over the course of the thing, and then, okay. Right. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about the demographic changes in Los Angeles, but it's fair to say at that time, Los Angeles as a whole was more conservative. Certainly the council had more conservative members. The Valley was conservative. Today, it's not really like that. Talk to me a little bit about the politics of South LA. I mean, were the churches the dominant force, or what was the vote-getting ability of candidates at that time?
I don't think that it has changed in the almost 50 years that I've been around. I think that in our community, the church is the root. I mean, it's the fiber that holds the community together. And it was then, and it is now. Now, the personalities may change. The names on the doors may change, but the doors stay the same. And I find myself, as my life goes on, you start to drift away from where you first started. But every once in a while, incidents and circumstances return you to where you started.
Sure.
And it's amazing how comforting it is to go back to those surroundings and to feel those feelings that you felt from the time you were a child
Sure.
to the time that you're an old man.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the characters you met then later came back in life in different capacities,
Yes.
right? Some of them got elected, some of them in
No
business.
No
et cetera.
question.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
The clerical community in Los Angeles, for the most part, for absolutely 99.99% part, has been extraordinarily productive for the community in itself.
We're talking to Dr. Bill Burke, 50 years in Los Angeles politics. So let's talk about, how did you first become aware of Yvonne Brathwaite?
You should have seen her. Everybody in the black community knew about that good-looking woman.
Well, hang on, because she was the first black woman elected in 1966.
Oh, before that.
Okay.
Before that.
All right.
In fact, I was in the opposition when she was elected.
Okay. The first time you mean?
The first
Okay.
time. Because she was a Bradley person, and I was a Dymally person. So
you had your own candidate that you guys were running?
yes, I remember him very clearly. Finney Jackson.
Okay.
Worked for the gas company. And Finney was a very nice guy, excellent candidate, handsome guy, articulate, and he ran against Yvonne and was supported by Jess, and she wiped the floor with him.
Now, tell me about that first campaign, even though you guys weren't together yet, but what do you remember about that race?
She was able, we had all the professional players, all the people who were in politics for some kind of subsistence living, because there wasn't a lot of money in it, but at
Right.
least in those days it was a subsistence living. She, on the other hand, had all the volunteers. She had all the ideologues. She had all the liberals. So that's how she did it. She went, and not only did she beat Finney, but Jess when he saw her coming, he put another candidate in the race who was a Caucasian guy who was a former legislative aide, and she wiped the floor with him too.
Him too, yeah. So it was a heck of a campaign.
Yeah, for a pretty woman who obviously was super bright, she did an unbelievable job.
Okay, but just so our viewers understand, well, in a previous interview I did with Yvonne, she mentioned that when she first got to the assembly, nobody wanted to sit next to her. I mean, it was a strange and shocking thing for a lot of these old guys to have an African-American woman elected to the state assembly. That was a very big deal at the time. When you,
Some of the guys didn't want to sit. Some of the guys wanted to sit by her
Right.
in the biblical term.
Right.
Right. But maybe
That's it,
they didn't
yeah.
want to sit by her in
Yeah.
the physical term.
Yeah.
But
Of course, it was Leo Ryan who later said, I'll sit next to her, and they became friends and so forth. But again, you'd never see that today, obviously. I mean, it's crazy to even think that way. But
I don't know. Some places, sometimes you just never know. It was like the great Gus Hawkins story. I don't know if you've ever heard that, when Gus was the second black person to be elected to the state assembly, and Gus was your complexion, and he went and he was sworn in, and he was sitting in his seat, and his seatmate turned to him and says, they elected a nigger to the assembly.
yeah.
And Gus said, "You're kidding me." So
Right.
right. So I don't know if it's impossible to happen today, but you never can tell. You never can tell.
So you continued working for Councilman Mills, and then in 1972, Yvonne decided to run for Congress, and her opponent was your boss. Tell us that story.
Oh, it was horrible. That was horrible. You know, how do you get yourself in a situation like that? How do you find a woman that you want to spend the rest of your life with that you think is just, you know, the cat's meow, and you're on the other side of a political battle? So, you know, I had no alternative. I summoned up all my little courage, and I went down, and I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Well, tell us the story.
So I went down to Billy's house, and Billy's
Was
wife.
he suspicious that something was up, or?
No. Nobody knew what.
Okay.
And I remember his wife Ruby was there, and the kids, who are now all adults, you know, they're all probably in their 40s now, were running around the house, you know, having a great time. They were like 3 or 4. And I went in the front room and I sat down with Billy, and I said, Billy, you know, this was one of the hardest things that I've had to do in my life. He said, well, what's up? I said, you know, I've fallen in love with a woman, and it puts me in a situation where I can't really manage your congressional campaign. He said, well,
Who is it?
who's the woman?
Right.
And when I told him, I thought he was going to have a stroke. You know, he was, hey, look, Billy Mills was one of the great living Americans, so he took it far better than I would have taken it. And Ruby actually hugged me and said that, you know, she was glad I found somebody that, you know, made me happy. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm guessing the campaign staff wasn't quite as loving about this.
I never really got to them. I'm sure that they really were but it was impossible. You know, I would have been a hypocrite if I did it.
Right.
And so, you know, there just was no alternative, because for probably 3 or 4 months leading up to that,
Yeah.
Yvonne and I were trying to be as inconspicuous as we could be. But
Not easy to do.
neither one of us are inconspicuous people.
Right.
So, you know, it was more than difficult. And I obviously made the right decisions 45 years later.
Still together.
And when you arrived today, we were out together having a good time, laughing.
Right.
You know, yeah, it's been a wonderful 45 years with her.
So Yvonne won that race, and of course, Billy later became the judge, so
Yes.
certainly as good of a job for him, and he had a career in the Superior Court. But you announced your engagement at her victory party during the primary.
Yeah, I think she did. You know, she didn't want me to change my mind, right?
Now you're committed, right? There's no point.
I got this guy.
Yeah. What do you remember about that race, about the congressional race?
The congressional race was not as difficult from an outsider's perspective of all her races, you know. I think that the drawing of the district was very contentious. And one of the few times in the 45 years we've been married, we weren't really married when this happened, just before we got married, when the reapportionment was going on in the state capitol building, Merv couldn't give up the Bradley thing. And he tried to do something that was not kosher to the district that she was.
You mean change the lines?
Yes, yes. And so we got on, I was not supposed to be on this elevator. It's an elevator for legislators only, but the two of them were on the elevator, and they dragged me on this elevator.
Yeah.
And it was, in that elevator was very, very heated, you know. And so when we got off, Yvonne went to the left and Merv said to me, well, I'm glad you're trying to calm her down. I said, no, man, I'm trying to keep her from kicking your ass. You know, I was trying to calm her down.
Right.
You know, so that was one of the few times that I've really seen her get heated, because she's a very logical, methodical person, you know, so. But she was hot that day.
Tom Bradley elected mayor in 1973. How did the Dymally people react to that, and what role did they have in his campaign?
I thought they were going to throw up in their pants. And to be honest, Tom was not real thrilled with me at that point, but it was very interesting because Tom Bradley was without a doubt the quietest person I knew. And how you knew you had communicated to Tom Bradley any kind of point or interest.
Sure, because he'd just look at your stone face.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Was,
and interestingly, people would walk away and say, oh boy, he's such a nice guy, such a great guy. But you just
right,
stand there. Right.
You could be standing on his foot and he'd never even say, you're standing on my foot.
Right.
The way you knew whether you got him that day or not, he always carried a number 10 envelope in his suit pocket. And if he took that number 10 envelope out and wrote a note on it, you knew that something was going to happen. You're hoping it's something good.
Right.
But you know.
Right.
So it was about his second year in office. And he called me one day, and I had just awarded the television contract for the LA Marathon to Channel 13. And Channel 5 had really wanted the contract. So he said that Channel 5 had been down complaining to him, and they wanted him to call me in. I said, Tom, you don't have anything to do with this. This is a business decision.
Right.
He said, no, but I would appreciate it if you come down. I said, you're going to take me to the woodshed, right? He said, yeah. I said, okay. I said, but don't hit me too hard. And he started laughing. So I went down. He berated me in front of the people from Channel 5. They left. He and I shook hands. And from that day forward, we were like amigos. We were buddies.
So the water under the bridge.
Everything was fine.
Yeah.
And I could call him day or night.
Yeah.
And he could call me, because not that he needed me, I needed him far more often than he needed me.
Right.
But he let it all go.
Now, when Yvonne was elected to Congress, how much time would you spend in Washington? How much time would you spend in LA, you personally?
I decided that in the interest of the marriage, that if I wanted to stay married, I had to stay with my wife. Because I know my own strength level. And I figured if I was a geographic bachelor, it wouldn't work. So what we did was, we would go on Mondays and come home on Thursdays. And what I did was I reversed my work week. Instead of working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I worked Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
In LA, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so people thought I was crazy because I call them on Friday and Saturday and Sunday about business stuff. And
Right.
Why you
Those were your work days.
Yeah, this is my work day.
Now, what do you remember about the DC years?
They were very, very interesting. It was like working for a mining company. DC is like a mining town. Or military.
In the sense that it's a company town, you mean?
Yes, yeah, right. Or it's like a military, because everybody in the military, everybody knows who you are and what you are by what you wear on your sleeve or your shoulder. And in Washington, D.C., they know who you are and what you are by the office which you hold. So if you go into a party, you get treated according to your rank. Well, for a kid from Ohio, that was, and Yvonne was just not used to it either.
Yeah, sure,
you know,
sure.
She was much more flexible than I was, but I think what got me the most was the first year we were there, Yvonne was a hot ticket.
Sure.
And we had some friends, we thought were friends, who invited us to a party at their house. And we found out later they sold tickets by telling people that we were going to be there.
Wow.
So, you know, that was, the other interesting story was, Yvonne was 8 months pregnant. And in those days, those little Mercedes coupes, you know, little convertibles, were brand new. They had been out 2 years. So I gave Yvonne one. So now she's like this big. So her assistant drives her to HUD for a meeting with the secretary of HUD. And she's so pregnant, she can barely walk, right? So she asked him to drop her near the front door, and when she goes to get out of the car, the cop says, "You can't stop here." And she said, "You know, I'm pregnant, and by the way, I'm a United States Congresswoman, and so I'm going to see the Secretary of HUD, and can I please just stop here? I don't want to park here." He's going to take the car. "No, can't open that door." And he made her move on. Well, she finally hobbled her way into the secretary's office. And her assistant calls the office and tells them what happened. Because Yvonne would never do anything like this. And they called the DC police.
Wow.
And the next morning at roll call, the watch commander makes this guy stand up. He says, "Let me ask you a question." He said, "Do you read the newspaper? Do you know who that woman was that you stopped from the pregnant woman who could have been any citizen and you should have let stop there?" So they transfer the guy from 11 to 7 a.m. in the Pentagon parking lot so he wouldn't be stopping a pregnant woman.
That was
out
it,
there.
yeah. Why didn't you stay in Washington? I mean, why did you and Yvonne ultimately decide to come back to California?
It was school. It was the Assemblywoman's school problem.
By that you mean Autumn was 5 and ready to start
right.
school.
And
So you decided you didn't want to make a life in D.C., you wanted to come back to LA. Because a lot of members obviously just choose to move their family to D.C.
Right. And, you know, we had a very lovely home in D.C. in a very lovely neighborhood. But it's not California. You know, we both love California.
Yeah.
And so...
I mean, had Yvonne stayed in the House, she would have had a career similar to Henry Waxman. You know, she probably would have been a committee chair. She would have been there for 30, 40 years. But you just felt that there was more
No,
opportunity
not
in LA.
me, her.
Okay.
That's her decision.
Okay. But I mean, from a business standpoint, you felt there was more opportunity in LA too, right?
I knew there was more opportunity here. And quite frankly, I had resigned myself to kind of a business mediocrity because I couldn't figure out how to get to the next level and work on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Sure.
Now, I made a very comfortable living, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I knew it just wasn't in the cards. So when she decided to move back here, and I had a normal work week plus those Saturdays and Sundays, my business career took off.
Because you were able to have a more normal life.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
But I had, at that point, forfeited probably 30 or 40%
Yeah.
of my earning years, my top potential earning years, to her career. There's not one day that there's some days that she's upset about, but there's not one day that I'm upset about.
That you look back. All right, well, let's talk about a couple other firsts. So she was, of course, the first member of Congress to give birth to Autumn while she was in the House. And that got a lot of attention at the time.
Right, but that shows you, because now there have been 134 births. And what does that say? That says that the United States Congress has changed so dramatically since her election that now there are women who are being elected to Congress who are within the childbearing.
Right. Hold on, but at that time it was very controversial.
Oh.
And Yvonne got some hate mail even from a couple of people saying, how can you
not
do
a couple
this?
people, hundreds of people.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people.
We didn't send you to Congress to make babies. We sent you to something like that, words to that effect. So
It was in Time magazine, so my father wrote me a letter and said, I knew your wee-wee would someday get you famous.
Oh, Dad.
Yeah, my dad. So, yeah.
But I mean, so looking back on that again, it's very different today, but that it was such a big deal.
There were 135 press people at the hospital when the Autumn was born. They had never seen anything like it.
And it was news on both coasts, right? I mean, it was just an LA story.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Amazing.
So,
Yeah. Now let me ask you the related question, of course, which was the Ebony cover. And most recently, we saw the Ebony cover featured prominently in Autumn's campaign. And Autumn told me that a number of people still come up to her and say, "You're the baby, you're the baby." They remember the iconic
people see me
cover.
on the plane
Yeah.
to this day and ask me how the baby's doing. Yeah,
The baby's in her 40s.
She's 42
Yeah,
years
yeah,
old
yeah.
and a member of the California
Yeah.
legislature.
Amazing. But that it was that iconic for a lot of people, and that they remembered it, and that they
Right.
still remember it. And also that Yvonne has told me that people bring her the magazine and ask her to sign it to this
Right.
day. So just speak to that briefly. I mean, do you think it was just a moment in time, or what? Why do people still remember it?
There are things that happen in your lifetime that are just, they happen to somebody else, but they mean so much to you that they become impressed on your life. And Yvonne didn't represent the district in California. She represented black people everywhere. And she represented black mothers everywhere. And the children of those black mothers, it was something that tapped into a vein which can't be replicated because it was at the right time, at the right moment, and she was the carrier of the message. Now it's going to be interesting because there's a picture over there on the mantle of Yvonne, Autumn, and Autumn's child, Isabella. And I often wonder what Isabella would have to do to have that kind of impact in her generation. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be here to see, but it is.
Well, that's an interesting question, which I was going to get to the future, but we can talk about it briefly. Is California going to continue looking the way it does? In other words, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-everything? Is that where you think California is going to go in the future? What is California going to look like 30 years from now?
Oh, I think it's like they pulled the finger out of the dike. I don't think that there's any slowing it down. I think the world may look different. I don't think it's California alone. You know.
Well, and then also, and of course, technology, when the two go hand in hand in terms of the changes.
I'm talking about people.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the way people look and dress. Yvonne and I were laughing the other day. There was a lady who in a restaurant, and she walked by, and Yvonne said to me, "You know, I don't know what black people look like anymore." I said, you know, the whole world's getting like that.
It's true. Yeah.
You know, I said that's what people who are race-based don't want to happen. They don't want
I mean, it's
this mongrelization
Sure.
of the world.
Sure.
So we all look.
No, but I mean, you can even remember when, you know, in the media, mixed race couples were a big deal. And totally not a big deal.
Right,
Everybody's
right.
in a mixed race relationship. Not a big deal.
Right.
But that was at one time considered very controversial.
Right. But I just think that the California, United States, the world is going to be such a melting pot that 30 years from now, race may not even be a factor.
Well, we were talking when we were warming up about how the millennials, when they're polled, they don't see things in terms of gender, they don't see things in terms of race. It's just not of great importance to them. And older people look at that and are very perplexed by that because a lot of their struggles were,
Sometimes I'm perplexed by that.
yeah.
You know, but in retrospect, when Betty Friedan and who was the other woman who made Gloria Steinem made those comments, I started thinking about them from the other women's perspective, and those comments were totally out of line.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 77,
Right.
so you know I can
you mean the
understand.
comments that women need to support a female
Yeah,
candidate?
there's a special place in hell
Right.
for women who don't
Right.
support women,
Right.
or
Madeline Albright said that, yeah, right.
and the other one said, you know, they're going there because that's where the dates are.
It's remarkable. But back to politics. So 1978, Yvonne runs for Attorney General, very tough race. Busing's an issue. Was that race, was taking that race a mistake, you think, that campaign?
When you lose, it's always a mistake.
Well, we
But-
should point out, today California has an African-American woman as Attorney General, not a big deal. Then a very big deal.
It was beyond the whole judicial system. You know, if you want to see how California was, go to Yvonne's law school alumni dinner and take a look at that.
What, 98% white men? Or what?
No, 99.999.
And
You
her.
know, and her.
Yeah, right.
And her, right?
Okay, yeah.
So the whole judicial system was like
Right.
that. So the possibility of having a black woman as
Right.
Attorney General was like having somebody from outer space come in and be the Attorney General.
Okay, but we should also point out, demographically, California was much more conservative, much more white. As an example, in 1970, California was 90%, the voting population was 90% white. They
right.
used to call it Iowa on the ocean. So we're not Iowa on the ocean anymore.
No, not anymore.
But at that time, and this is of particular interest for younger viewers, I want them to know how conservative California was. Even if you ran as a Democrat, you had to pretty much be a middle of the road.
Well, you know, you got to remember there are people like Murphy who was in the Senate and, you know, who was a little to the right of Attila the Hun. So, yeah, it was very conservative. But she didn't do poorly in that race. But if it hadn't been for buses, I think she might have had a shot. But that absolutely took her down.
Okay, so that led to an unexpected opportunity, and I want you to just retell the story you told me briefly. But Yvonne was appointed by Jerry Brown in 1979 to the 4th District Board of Soup seat. Tell me that story, how that happened.
It was Saturday afternoon, and the previous day, the 5th District Supervisor had just walked out of his office and resigned. And a friend of mine by the name of Bernie Human had invited myself and Yvonne to a party at Jerry Weintraub's house. And we actually lived in the house up the hill at that time. And so Yvonne and I went over there, and as I walked in, Jerry Brown was there, and so was Jerry Weintraub. So I said to Jerry Weintraub, I said, you know, this, can't recall his name, resigned Friday. Wouldn't it be great if Jerry would appoint Yvonne to the Board of Supervisors? So Yvonne was saying right there, she was embarrassed because I brought it up. Jerry Weintraub looked at me and said, that's a great idea, I'll get it done. 3 days later.
There it was. Now, when she was considering the appointment, Gil Lindsay said to her that if he had the chance to do it for one day, he would do it. And that was ultimately one of the major factors that made her want to do it. But she knew it was very difficult to hold the seat at that time, because that seat, unlike the seat she was later elected to, was a much more conservative
Right.
seat. So do you think getting that taste of it, the 1 year and change that she was on it, made her then later want to run for it later when the seat came open?
I don't know, but let me tell you the background on it. When she lost that seat, she dedicated her life to raising Autumn. Okay?
And she took some time off politics,
Right.
our viewers know.
Oh, yeah. She just, whatever Autumn needed, Yvonne wanted to be there. So Autumn decided she wanted to go to UC San Diego. And I wanted to go to Las Vegas. So we drove on, we traditional family, pack up the big rent-a-truck and drive the kid down, drop off all these clothes and stuff. Got Autumn all squared away in her room, went down, got in the car, and we're going to drive to the San Diego airport because we're flying to Vegas. We got to the driveway going out of the university. Yvonne looks at me and says, I think I'm going to run for office again.
That's how you found out.
And so it had been on her mind. She completed her mission.
Dropped her off at school, and
got this kid's going to be okay. She's
Yeah.
going to graduate from college. I'm going to make sure that
Wow.
happens. I think I'm going to go back and continue to serve.
Okay, now that segues into a very interesting story, which was her 92 race. This was the mother of all races. This was an incredibly, well, first of all, why was it such a difficult race?
Well, it was a race between two women who both deserved to be there.
And who had known each other for many years, been sorority
Probably
sisters.
related.
Yeah.
If you actually looked at the genetics of the two women, they are probably related.
You're saying on the Watson side. Yeah.
So it's hard to campaign against your friend. But they both did. And Yvonne won by some narrow squeaking margin. I forget it was like 300 or 400 votes.
Now, the other thing that's unprecedented in Los Angeles politics is right before the primary, the 92 riots break out, predominantly in that district.
Right, right.
And large portions of the district were burned down a month before the election. So how did that change the race?
Well, it made it the aggressive campaigning was more tepid. Security was obviously higher. And to be honest, I think it toned down the rhetoric of the literature.
Because of what had happened? And,
Right,
yeah.
right. And both women respected the community and wanted to be a positive force, not a negative force.
Okay.
And both of them are the kind of people who understand that if you throw gasoline on a flame, it's going to burn. And so,
Tell us a little bit about what was your role in the campaign?
oh no, I was, I had very little role, if any, in that campaign. I was Yvonne's driver when called on, because this was her career, and I didn't want any of my business dealings to interfere with her credibility with the community.
Okay.
Now,
But did part of you want to get in the trenches and,
yes. And I would be disingenuous if I didn't say that I didn't have a plan B in preparation.
Sure. But as far as LA campaigns go, that's a very unique campaign to this day, don't you think?
one of the 2 or 3 most unique in the ethnic community. That one, Mark Ridley Thomas and Bernard Parks, and Tom Bradley versus Sam Yorty.
Let's take the third one for a second. Why, besides the obvious change in feeling in Los Angeles, but what else is unique about that race in your opinion?
Which one?
Yorty and Bradley.
Yorty ran a machine, and he had a long time to put it together. And so, and he had money. And in those days, there was susceptibility to influence of financial reward in all.
You mean from business interests and that
Right,
sort of thing? Yeah.
right. And from personalities, and from personalities. And Tom didn't have that.
Now, today Yorty is kind of seen as a bigot. Is that exaggerated, do you think? I mean, obviously he ran a very racially polarized campaign, but do you think he was personally a bigot?
I personally don't think so. There are those who do. What I go back to is, at the time, he hired probably the smartest black political technician in the city to be one of his advisors, okay? And
Was that purely pragmatic? I mean, he thought it would get him votes, or what made him want to do it?
it may have been politically pragmatic, but the fact that he listened to him and reacted to his suggestions, to me was telling.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're Max Rafferty,
Yeah, right. You don't care.
you don't care,
Right.
you know? And so I believe that he was a conservative, no question about that. Mm-hmm. And I believe he had his own way of doing things. But if you ask me if he was a racist, I just, my personal opinion was no.
It wasn't. Well, let's touch on the marathon briefly, and of course we could do a whole separate series on that. But just briefly, how and why did you start the marathon?
This is the craziest story. We're sitting here in this house one night, and one of my buddies who used to own the Chateau Marmont Hotel calls me up and says, I'm going to a Brotherhood's Crusade dinner tonight. No, not Brotherhood's Crusade, I'm sorry. Big Brother dinner. He says, you want to go with me? Yvonne was out somewhere, so I said, sure, I'll go with you. So we go over to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. We sit down at the table, and this was just after the Olympic Games, maybe...
The '84 Olympic Games.
Yeah, maybe 2 months.
Bill, we could be watching this in the future, and it's the 2024 Olympic Games. So that's why I had to say the 1984.
Yeah. 1984, yeah. And so I had been the commissioner of tennis at the '84 Olympics. And the commissioner of athletics happened to be at this dinner. And he came over to me and he said, hey man, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. What are you doing these days? I said, he says, well, I'm trying to get the city of Los Angeles to start a marathon, but they're being very obstinate. I said, really? I said, that's a great idea. I got up from the table. I went into the hallway there at Beverly Wilshire, and there used to be a phone bank right there in that building in the back. And I called Tom Bradley at home, and I said, Tom, I just spoke to the commissioner of athletics for the Olympics, and he said that they're trying to push for a marathon. I think that's a great idea. I said, LA needs to do that. He says, well, we'll have to put it out to an RFP. I said, I'd be interested in doing that if they did that. And that's what happened. They put it out to an RFP, and I won that RFP.
How'd you win it?
Well, depends on who you talk to. The staff of the city was bound and determined that I didn't get it, because their favorite was the press officer for the former Olympic Games. In fact, we were my partner is a white woman, and they marked us down on women ownership and minority participation. How could you,
Right.
It was impossible.
Right.
But when it got to the council floor, I did have a number of friends on the council and people who had faith in my ability. And so one of my opposition's supporters got up and said, how can you give this RFP to Bill Burke? He doesn't know anything about running. So Gil Lindsay got up and said, how did we give the Olympic Games to Peter Ubaugh? He didn't know anything about running the Olympics.
Right.
And they voted me a 5-year contract.
And then you ran the marathon for close to 20 years.
23.
Why'd you make the decision to sell it?
There are times I wish I didn't.
A lot of people who sell a business, whatever the price, whatever thing, regret it later.
Right. Well, the reason I contemplated it was that Antonio wanted to run for governor. And Bishop Blake was squeezing him to get it off Crenshaw. And so Antonio was squeezing me to go to Monday, not Sunday.
You mean to have it on a Monday? Okay.
Yeah. I thought that was a death wish.
Yeah. I mean, it obviously would have affected the enrollment significantly.
And the television ratings, because television was a big revenue. So when these guys came along and had a lot of money, I succumbed to, and I was warned. The Lakers were owned by Jerry Buss and Frank Mariani, right? So Frank Mariani, for the past 40 years, has been a good a friend to me as anybody in this world. So one night I'm having dinner with him at a Laker game, and I told him that these people had come and offered me all this money to sell the marathon.
And you had offers, obviously, through the years.
Yeah, right. And he looked at me and he said, why would you do that? I said, didn't you hear the money part? And he said, what would you go do that you would have more fun at? He said, people offer Jerry and I money all the time. I said, the money's great.
Right.
But what would we do that would be more fun than owning the Los Angeles Lakers? It made a lot of sense to me for about 20 minutes till I got out of there and started thinking about the money again. So I sold.
And that was it.
That was it.
And you've
And
only a little bit looked back.
People ask me all the time, do I miss it?
Yeah.
It's like having a grown child. Every child has his life,
You mean in the house as a little kid?
Yeah. So
You moved on to other pursuits. And when Jack Warner sold Warner Brothers, his complaint was he retired to Palm Springs, and they said, I'm just another millionaire here in Palm Springs. So you've stayed busy. You didn't just sit back and say, that was all I'm going to do.
I had to stay busy because, I'd have driven everybody in this house crazy if I had stayed busy, you know.
Good way to be. All right, a couple other topics I want to cover. Your daughter was a year and a half ago elected to office.
I'm still trying to get her over that.
Well, I want to discuss that with you because I know at first you were skeptical whether she could win as a candidate.
That's her story.
Okay, well, let's hear your story. This is your chance.
I can't-
Let's preface the story by saying Autumn had a career in real estate and had done a number of things, but had not been involved in politics in terms of being elected to a lower office. The assembly seat came available and she decided to run. So go ahead, take it from there.
Autumn's the kind of person who can do anything. She could go out and sell balloons tomorrow and she'd make a fortune, okay? Because she's smart and she sees how to market and that kind of thing. She claims that I said that she couldn't win. Now, she doesn't lie, so I probably did say it. But how could she not win? I mean, with her personality and her abilities and the support of her mom and her dad, you know, she had an enormous base to leap forward.
Okay, but she also had the politician's child problem, which is you inherit 100% of the enemies and half of the friends, right, as the old expression goes.
Right. Well, in her case, I think she did a little better because her mother to this day is still doing constituent work. This phone rings every other day with someone who has a problem.
Sure, so in other words, just because you're retired doesn't mean you're out of office
Right,
yet.
and Yvonne or myself, it's part of our lifestyle. So when it came to staffing up, Autumn had her base of friends, and I was amazed at how expansive it was.
And a lot of new friends that hadn't necessarily supported you or anybody else.
Right. Just
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, just as a spectator, is I mean, she's a hell of a candidate. I don't know where that came from. I know that
Cute.
it was, yeah.
She's
but she's a hell of a
articulate.
candidate. Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
You know.
And that, but let me say, a lot of children of politicians don't necessarily have that skill, and a lot of times, you know, they're pushed into it by their parents or whatever the reason is, and they just don't have it, or they just bomb. You know.
Well, I never thought she'd run. Her mother pushed her to be a lawyer. She said, absolutely not, I don't want to be a lawyer. Her mother pushed her to run for election. She said no. This was all on her stick.
So you just think the timing was right, or what?
I've never had a conversation with her. She said to me one time that she went into a rest home. I know what it was. She's got a friend who runs these convalescent homes for people in houses. And he's really a swell fellow. And she went with him and she saw the needs of these people. And it got her. And that's what motivated her to run for office. Now it sounds just like something her mom would say. But that's what she says got her out there.
Okay, but anybody who thinks that you guys did it for her don't know the race, because when she started, it was a very competitive primary, and she had to pay her dues and win them over. I mean, if she hadn't have done it, she would not have been elected.
She's still doing that. The West Side Democratic clubs had the convention a couple weeks ago. They gave her a fit. Now they endorsed her eventually, but I was pleasantly surprised. So, you know, I had a woman text me last night from Hakata, Japan, who lives in Malibu, who's an environmentalist, lives in Malibu, was in touch with the environmentalists in Venice when Autumn was first running, came back to me and said she can't win. Environmentalists in Venice are not going to support her. They're going to be with Betsy Butler. Now, she texted me last night from Japan. She's up there seeing some snow eagles because she found out that Autumn put in a bill about the California Coastal Commission.
Yeah, that was just in the news yesterday. Yeah.
Now, everybody wants to be involved in that. So yeah, Autumn's winning people over still.
Tell me about the actual race and comparing it to the races you ran many years before. How is the election process different today than it was when you first started cutting your teeth in Los Angeles politics?
It's like asking a guy who worked on cars in 1940, can he work on my Tesla?
How the Packard is different than the...
Can he work on my Tesla?
Yeah.
No, I can't do that.
So you're referring to technology, you're referring to reaching voters, you're referring to...
It's just so different now that the campaign techniques that we used in my tenure in the early 60s is so obsolete
Okay,
now.
but there's still some precinct walking, there's still some good old-fashioned grassroots campaigning. That part of it hasn't changed that much.
Yeah, it has.
Really?
Yeah, because in the old days you went and knocked on doors, knock on this door, next door. Now you have sheets that have the names.
That's true, and the voting history. And
right. So you don't waste your time going up to this door or that door.
They're not going to vote. You keep
right. So yeah, all of it's changed. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that's the same. Mm-hmm. You know, and like you were talking about Facebook and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff.
Well, what we were discussing was that you can target voters now on Facebook. You can use Facebook as a means to communicate with your voters and your constituents. That didn't obviously exist 4 years ago or anything like that. Were you surprised though at her ability to campaign and her ability to win supporters?
She worked in 2 of my businesses for a number of years. I gave her some of the toughest jobs. I gave her jobs some guys wouldn't take. She killed them. I started a car race one day, a NASCAR. Now you know how sexist NASCAR is.
You bet, yeah.
Autumn went in there. She buffalo wrestled those guys. She was in charge.
And they didn't know what hit them.
No clue.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, they're still asking me to come back. They're not asking me to come back. They're really asking Autumn to come back. They just don't know it. So, no, I wasn't surprised by her campaigning. She never met somebody she didn't know, and she likes everybody. And so now, she did run into some of her mother's and my foes, and those people treat her less than pleasant, but it never even slowed her down.
You work around it and keep going.
Yeah, she won by 76% of the vote.
Yeah, not bad.
I think it's going to be better this time.
AQMD has been an interest of yours, particularly in recent years. You served on the AQMD board. Why air quality? And for a lot of people, that's a very obscure topic. So why air quality?
When I used to hang out with Muhammad Ali, he used to carry these tracts. And when people would ask for his autograph, he'd autograph them a tract and give it to them, right? So inevitably, I would end up carrying the big pack of tracts, and they were heavy. So one day I was just tired of it. I looked at him and I said, why are we doing this? He said, this is the price you pay to get into heaven. I thought about it for a while. That's a pretty cheap price to pay to get into heaven, right? So when I had the opportunity, when Speaker Brown asked me to go on AQMD, I knew about as much about air quality as that piano. But when I got there and I found out what the ramifications were, I realized it was very important. So I've spent 23 years of my life out there. I spent 18 and a half years as chair.
That's longer than Yvonne was on the Board of Soup, so this is a long time here, yeah.
I am the longest serving chairman in the history of AQMD. I'm the longest serving speaker appointee in the history of California.
Wow.
But I have 2 more years left on my term. I'll be 79 years old. I think that's it. I think that's it. It would take some unusual circumstances for me to continue. But as bad as we are comparatively nationally, the air quality in this district has improved for consecutively 23 years.
Sure.
So I'm very proud of that.
Sure, and the brownouts, so you remember of the 70s,
All those
80s,
things
yeah,
are gone.
Yeah, sure.
You know. So when I arrived in Los Angeles, maybe once or twice a month, there'd be a 30 or 40 car pileup on the freeway because the cars couldn't see each other.
Right.
So one would hit another one, then they'd all pile in it. Unheard of now.
Mm-hmm.
Unheard of. Wearing gas masks, unheard of.
Unheard of, yeah.
So we've obviously been doing something right. But it's one of those never-ending fights, and it's never fast enough for those who say there are 6,000 people a year that die of air-related illnesses, and they're right. That's never fast enough for them. And it's always too fast for the guy who's got a small business and who's tired of all the regulations and doesn't want one more report
Right.
to fill out.
Well, it's a balance, obviously.
Yeah, so, you know, supervisor at Thomas said the other day, he said, you know, Ali might have named the rope-a-dope, but you're the king of the rope-a-dope.
Well, that's very flattering.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that balance,
Yeah.
it's just tough
The
to
key,
maintain.
yeah. A couple other things. What advice do you give to young people getting started in local politics today based on your own experience and your own career path?
There is no job too small. There's no hours that are too long. There's no issue that's too small. You know, because it's hard to imagine. But in my lifetime, when I went to work for the California legislature, there were only 3 minorities working in the entire legislature.
As staffers, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was Otho Green, Richard Alatorre, and myself.
Wow.
Now today, if you go in the state capitol building, nobody could even conceive that. So if you want to walk into a campaign headquarters or an office, get an internship or just a volunteer, you have no idea where that takes you in life. Because being part of the process is very, very important.
Finally, we mentioned your granddaughter, Isabella, and Isabella's going to grow up in a California that's very different than the California we've discussed in this interview. What do you want her to know about her grandfather that she might not already know?
Gee, that's a very interesting question. Well, I think she's going to know pretty much about me, but I want her to know that I never give up. I'm like any other person. Sometimes I get discouraged. But when I get discouraged, I'll go off somewhere and I'll regroup and I'll figure a strategy and I'll come back and I never give up.
Has that been a theme throughout your career?
Throughout my life. So if there's one thing I could give her and one thing she might not know about me, that might be it.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Bill Burke, 50 years in politics.
Thank you. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
My
Good time.
pleasure.
Okay.
My pleasure.